history. Let's discuss some of the ins and outs of this with our regular panel here on a non-sitting week. New Senator James Paterson, live from Melbourne, and former Liberal Party leader in Western Australia, Matt Burney. Gentlemen, thanks for your company. James Paterson, a personal question for you first up. What happens to your pre-selection if it's a double dissolution election? Have you got to go through that whole rigmarole again?
No, not quite, Peter. There is a relevant body of the Liberal Party in Victoria's State Assembly which will determine the order of the ticket in the event of a double dissolution election. It's about 120 people. My view is it's probably quite likely that the existing sitting senators will come to some kind of agreement between themselves and will suggest that to State Assembly, and it's up to State Assembly to decide whether they agree with that suggestion. But I expect that all the sitting senators will be...
What you're telling me is you think it'll all be very civil?
I think I do.
Well, pre-selections are always civil, aren't they, Matt Burney?
Well, they might be in the East Coast. They don't tend to be that civil in the West Coast, of course. But look, it's actually a pertinent point that you raised, Peter, because it's really problematic for a leader of a party to sort of go down that path of a double dissolution, because half of your own senators aren't too happy about the prospect of having to come up for election when they otherwise might have another 3 odd years to go.
Yeah, well, James Paterson, let's call a spade a spade. Matt Burney's right. I mean, it's all right for you. You were number one on the ticket. In any discussion, you're probably looking safe as a house. But what about some people that are going to be further down the order at an election that could see anything happen?
Well, I'm not sure about that, Peter. I don't think there's any sitting senator who will be in a more vulnerable position at this election than they would have been otherwise. Remember that the quota for election is halved and Senate reform has just taken place. So my expectation is that all sitting senators have a very good chance of being re-elected, and we have the opportunity to bring in some new colleagues, including my running mates here in Victoria, who are pre-selected for positions that would be more difficult to win under normal circumstances.
All right, let's move on to the actual specifics of the issue, though. Matt Burney, your thoughts on the decision tactically and strategically, I suppose, by the Prime Minister to do what he's done today?
I find it to be quite interesting. It's the threat of a double dissolution election is a very dark black cloud hanging over the careers of a number of senators, and it will certainly make them think twice about whether or not they support the ABCC bill, particularly those senators who might still have another 3 years to go. And whilst you could say, look, they'll probably get re-elected again, why do they want to test the market? They're already elected, and if they had their way, they probably wouldn't want to go to an election anytime soon. But look, I think it's an interesting tactical play. I should also say that double dissolutions are an extraordinary tool for extraordinary times. Generally, it would involve some kind of a constitutional crisis. I'm not sure that just going to a double dissolution on the back of 1 or 2 bills is the way forward, but certainly I think it's a pretty good stick to wave in the air, and I think it will probably have the desired impact, and the Prime Minister will probably come out of this looking like a strong leader and looking like he's put through a piece of legislation that I might say was very, very necessary.
Well, James Paterson, Senator James Paterson, that's a fair point that Matt Burney makes. He'll certainly come through looking a lot stronger, even if this perhaps isn't the strongest trigger going around, although I'm sure you'd take some exception to that, certainly going back to your IPA heritage. But what about this? You'd agree with this, wouldn't you? The Prime Minister, Senator Paterson, needed to look strong because you, as much as anyone before you became the team player in the Senate, although your maiden speech suggested maybe not, you, as much as anyone, were critical, weren't you, of some of the lack of rigour that was being shown by the government over the last 6 months in certain policy areas. This, in a sense, gives the PM a stronger focus and does show that he's prepared to muscle up.
Well, Peter, to summarise, I certainly welcome the Prime Minister's decision. I think it's an excellent decision. It is a really clarifying choice for the Senate and for senators, and it will potentially be a really clarifying choice for the Australian people. Senators have the opportunity to pass the legislation that this government was elected to enact, that it has a clear mandate for in the Australian Building and Construction Commission legislation and the Registered Organisations Commission. And if
Would
the
you be
Senate
open to amendments on that, Senator? I mean, I asked this of Senator Zed Zeldra, and he kind of dodged the question a little bit earlier this afternoon. If there are amendments, it removes the trigger. And it strikes me that whilst the Prime Minister's not bluffing that he will go to a DD election if this legislation doesn't pass, there is a little bit of a bluff in the sense that I think he wants the election more than he wants the legislation passed. What if they put it forward with amendments, the crossbenchers, to be passed? Would you be open to that as long as the amendments don't gut it?
Well, there have been opportunities to do that already, Peter, and I'm not aware of any amendments that are consistent with the government's policy. This is a policy the government was elected to implement.
What about a sunset clause?
This is a policy the government promised to introduce. No, I don't think a sunset clause is appropriate. The government was elected to introduce this policy. We never said that there was going to be a sunset clause. It's clearly backed by the majority of Australian people, and if the Senate doesn't want to pass it, that is the Senate's right, but it's also the government's right to take up the constitutional options it has to resolve that blockage if it's been rejected twice, which it looks like it will be, sadly.
Matt Burney, what's your view on that? I mean, the Senator is right. It certainly was a policy at the last election. I'm not sure if polled how many voters would remember that.
I think it's also worth examining the genesis of this bill. Who could forget the allegations that came out of the most recent Trade Union Royal Commission? We heard allegations of male union thugs physically assaulting female developers. We heard allegations of blackmail, of people paying off union officials, $2,000 or $3,000 a week to curry favour with them. And very importantly, we heard allegations of unions feathering their own nest rather than that of their members, which I think is equally important as those sort of corruption allegations. So the real question is, why wouldn't you have an ABCC that is a watchdog there essentially to stamp out that sort of behaviour? What could the possible argument be against having an ABCC? I heard Senator was just on the program before we came on, who spoke a fair bit about this topic, and I was trying very hard to discern exactly what it was that he was trying to say. And I think what he was trying to say was that all of those myriad of allegations that were laid against members of the building industry and the trade unions, etc., are just allegations, and that all of those people should have their day in court before we even move to amend any kind of legislation. Well, that of course could be 2 to 4 or 5 years away before all of those people have their day in court, and I think it's nonsensical to say that we should wait until that happens before we would introduce the ABCC.
Senator Paterson, why not bring the Clean Energy Finance Corporation into this trigger mix if there is going to be a joint sitting of Parliament after the election, assuming your side of politics is successful? Why not do that?
Well, that's a matter for the Prime Minister.
No,
and
you
the
must have an
Environment
opinion. One of the great traditions of the Liberal Party is that as a backbencher, you're actually allowed to have an opinion on this sort of thing. Why not bring it in?
Well, Peter, just let me get to it. I was about to say,
Okay.
While it is a matter for the Prime Minister and the Environment Minister, I certainly will be putting forward my view, which is that we should use it as a double dissolution trigger. I do believe that the previous policy of abolishing the Clean Energy Finance Corporation was the correct one, because this is exactly the kind of corporate welfare that the Australian government should not be engaging in the 21st century. We've seen in America and around the world how disastrous some of these taxpayer finance so-called clean energy projects have been. The Solyndra company in the United States, which is a multi-billion-dollar failure. They're happening all around the world. I don't want to see them happen in Australia, and I don't think there is a case for the federal government to start a bank for the purposes of financing a particular type of project. I don't think it's right.
So, Senator Paterson, is it correct to say that you're disappointed that the Prime Minister hasn't included the abolition of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation in this DD trigger that he is trying to establish?
Oh, well, I think it's premature to say that for sure, Peter. I haven't seen the Prime Minister explicitly rule it out. What I would say is that I'm hopeful that the Prime Minister would consider it. Well, I didn't say it, Peter, but I would say I'm hopeful that the Prime Minister would consider it. I think it is a worthy trigger, and I think it's a worthy policy that we should pursue.
Do more of your colleagues that you know of feel the same way about that, do you think?
I haven't spoken to any of my new colleagues about it. I've only been up in Canberra for a week, and there were many other things to discuss, so this is not something I've discussed with any other colleagues.
Matt Burney, the word that Kieran Gilbert, my colleague here at Sky News, had earlier today was that the Prime Minister didn't want to muddy the waters in terms of this trigger that they're looking to use on industrial relations by including something in that more environment-based space. You've heard Senator Paterson's essentially disappointed by that. He's more cautious than that, but that's what he is, I think. I suspect he's not alone in that view. Could you see that blowing up for the Prime Minister?
Well, look, going to a double dissolution election, and I might just put the caveat in that I don't think we will go to a double dissolution election.
Oh, you think they'll cave?
But, well, I think that's a real possibility, but even if they don't, I'm still not sure where that would leave us, quite frankly. But I think it would be a tricky thing to get through the party room completely. But putting that to one side, it is an opportunity to pass a whole swag of bills in a joint sitting of both houses after a double dissolution election. But that obviously has to be weighed up with the politics of the day, and do you, to use your words, muddy the waters if you introduce another bill or another couple of bills alongside the ABCC bill? And I think, frankly, you probably do. The ABCC bill is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. The public get this whole union thuggery thing and the corruption that is insidious throughout that building industry. And I think you'll find that the general public are on side with that bill. Were you to introduce a few other bills and end up with 10 or 20 or 30% of the population against them, then I think you would lose the impetus for a double dissolution election. So I certainly get that, and I certainly understand it, quite frankly.
James Paterson, well, if you're a betting man, I mean, we just heard from Matt Burney, he doesn't think there will be a double dissolution. He must be a betting man, he's from Kalgoorlie. But from your perspective, if you're a betting man, what do you think? Do you think we're likely now to have a double dissolution election? Do you think the Senate's going to buckle on ABCC reforms or not?
Well, Peter, I'm hopeful that a double dissolution election isn't necessary. It shouldn't be necessary to pass what is a complete no-brainer, as Matt says, in terms of the ABCC bill, a reasonable policy that has received the endorsement of the Australian people at multiple elections, that's been recommended by multiple royal commissions and other inquiries when we have a very serious issue of union corruption. So I'm hopeful that one is not necessary. I'm hopeful that the senators, in particular those on the crossbench who have had reservations about this, see the light and reconsider their positions on it. But if they don't, the Prime Minister has set out a very clear course of the mechanism to resolve this, which is a double dissolution election.
What about the fact, though, that when you prorogue the Parliament, all bills are immediately dismissed at that moment in time? So if Parliament comes back, James Paterson, surely only the Senate come back, or otherwise, what do the House of Representatives do? There's got no legislation to consider.
Yes, well, Peter, that's that's not really my area. I defer to the Attorney General on those kind of questions.
Yeah, but how do you think they're going to feel,
sure
I guess, is what I'm asking. They're going to be there on school holidays. It's all right for a young fellow like you. I assume you don't have kids, maybe you do. But, at the end of the day, school holidays, nothing for the House to consider because proroguing removes all the bills. I can understand why you lot in the Senate have to be there, but the poor House of Representatives MPs, they thought they were going to have a quick break with the family ahead of a gruelling election campaign.
Well, Peter, and they've got a lot of other things to do at home in their elections as well. I'm sure the House will sit for as long as it needs to for this purpose and not any longer than that. I don't think that the Prime Minister would have his House colleagues sitting around in Canberra unless there was important things for them to do. So I'm sure they'll be there for as long as they need to be there, and senators will be there for as long as we need to be there to get this legislation either passed or resolved by the Senate in another way.
I suspect you're right. Matt Burney, quick one on the budget. Budget's been brought forward by a week. The Treasurer didn't seem to know about it, or he plays a good game of poker if he does. He was confirming an hour before this announcement that it would be on 10 May. In fact, it's on 3 May. One of my colleagues at Sky News tells me that sources close to the Treasurer suggest that there was no knowledge by him prior to that cabinet hookup. You would have thought you'd keep the Treasurer in the loop on when he's delivering the budget, wouldn't you?
Oh, look, I'm not sure that's accurate. I'm sure he had a pretty decent idea. But one thing I would say, having sort of been involved in politics for some time, is that even though the budget process starts a long time prior, you tend to only just get it ticked off with hours to go before you have to walk into the Parliament and actually get it out there. So bringing it forward by a week, I think, will probably put the government under a little bit of pressure, quite frankly, because it's not an easy thing to produce and have ticked off a budget ready for presentation to Parliament. So a bit of pressure there. But just one final point on the ABCC. I think all of your listeners would be aware that the mining industry is at a historical low at the moment. Resources prices are down, and we really need to foster and nurture other industries such as the building industry and the construction industry right now at this point in the cycle. And without an ABCC, unions are left to run riot across those building sites, and I think that would be detrimental for Australia as a whole, not just for that industry.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Appreciate your company as always on a Monday of a non-sitting week. Thank you very much. Great to have your company.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.